Donald Trump just spent almost 2 hours delivering remarks on the daring rescue of 2 American F-15 crew members and what comes next with the war with Iran. Much of that was overshadowed, though, by this weekend's threats to bomb civilian power plants and bridges. Experts say these attacks would constitute war crimes. Earlier today, President Trump was explicitly asked by MS Now if he was prepared to commit a war crime. He refused to answer. Given what he told the New York Times, the only thing stopping him seems to be his own morality. Because as he says, he doesn't need international law. The very real prospects of yet another escalation is not something the American public has the stomach for, at least according to all the recent polls. It's also not sitting well with his already skeptical base, which feels battered by skyrocketing prices, confused by a war with no clear objectives, and deceived by a president who made promises and then broke them. Former Congresswoman and one-time Trump ally Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted, "Christians in the administration should be pursuing peace, urging the president to make peace, not escalating war that is hurting people. This not what we promised the American people when they overwhelmingly voted in 2024. I know. I was there more than most. This is not making America great again." With the president on the defensive, Peter Hamby, a contributing writer for Puck News, is openly asking if the war in Iran is Donald Trump's Hurricane Katrina, a defining symbol of government incompetence with grave political consequences. Joining us now, managing editor at The Bulwark and an MS Now contributor, Sam Stein, former New York Congressman and senior advisor for Vote Vets, Max Rose, and former U.S. Army officer, captain in the JAG Corps, and former assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Connecticut, Margaret Donovan. It's great to have all of you here. So much to process after that press conference that I hope the three of you got the chance to watch. But Sam, I'm going to start with you. The president, he spent the day dismissing Americans skeptical of the war. He called them foolish. How does his rhetoric, which only escalated from there over the course of that afternoon press conference, how does it reassure Americans that things are going to go well here at home?
Well, I'm not sure it's reassuring at all. Honestly, if you watch the press conference at various points, it didn't seem like there was any coherent rationale behind what we were doing. So just to take one example, he was asked how it would benefit the Iranians if we dropped bombs and sent them back to the Stone Age. And the president responded by saying he'd gotten intercepted communiques saying that the Iranians wanted to be bombed. I mean, does anyone actually believe that? I don't know. And then later in the press conference, he actually said he didn't want to bomb them, but his hand was forced. Just another example, take the Strait of Hormuz. A couple days ago, he was posting that the strait would open naturally, and that was the job of the Europeans to get it open. And then today he was asked if it was a top priority for him in any negotiated peace deal. And he said, yes, absolutely top priority for them. And he went on about how one landmine or water mine could disrupt all of this, and then started talking about taking a toll for the United States from shipping activity in the Strait. So there's nothing really coherent about what's happening here. The only, I guess, coherent thread is that we are making insane, grandiose threats that are war crimes, and that the president is putting some sort of artificial deadline of 8 p.m. tomorrow, and we're all sort of waiting anxiously, really, to see if this is a negotiating ploy to get some sort of deal, or if we're going to witness a genuine atrocity at 8 p.m. tomorrow night that we, have no power to stop. It's just up to Donald Trump. It's a really remarkable and scary situation we find ourselves in.
Max, Sam spells the key question out right there. Mm-hmm. Either we're going to witness something potentially horrifying tomorrow night, or he's going to taco again. To a certain extent, and a lot of people think it's the latter, that he'll extend a deadline or come up with some sort of excuse. But in a way has damage to our standing, also to our service members, who are the people who would have to carry out these war crimes, by the way. Has the damage already been done?
Well, let's think about how we got here, right? The craziness of this whole situation is at this point, the United States of America's strategic goal is to return things to where they were 90 days ago, right? Where the Strait of Hormuz, there's free passage. And in order now to accomplish that, it appears that regime change would need to occur. And in order for regime change to occur, the United States would have to invade Iran. You cannot achieve regime change from the skies. We're talking about multiple divisions going into Iran. That is, of course, how we achieved regime change in Iraq more than 20 years ago. So this is a situation entirely created by Donald Trump. Many soldiers' lives are at risk. Of course, some have already lost their lives. And the tragedy of it all is that that would just, in order to put those soldiers' lives at risk, it would just to be able to go back in time and be where we were 90 days ago. We've gotten nowhere, and we've wasted resources, and the affordability crisis has only gotten worse.
Margaret, I want you to take a listen to Trump on this very issue.
We have a plan, because of the power of our military, where every bridge in Iran will be decimated by 12 o'clock tomorrow night, where every power plant in Iran will be out of business, burning, exploding, and never to be used again. I mean, complete demolition by 12 o'clock. And it'll happen over a period of 4 hours if we wanted to. We don't want that to happen. We may even get involved with helping them rebuild their nation.
Every plant burning, exploding there. You know, I understand, Margaret, that there are cases in which military lawyers can assess that infrastructure used by civilians, that it can become fair game. There's a whole lot of work that's supposed to go into that process. My understanding, not an expert, is that it is not normally up to the president just to put that out on Truth Social or to work it out himself in the middle of a live press conference. But you are a JAG officer. You were a military lawyer. So help me understand how this is supposed to work.
Sure. So that's exactly right, that at times civilian infrastructure, bridges, even power plants, in certain circumstances, could be legally targetable. But we see these types of targets get engaged after significant analysis and a really formal determination that it is going to offer some type of military advantage. And so the president's statements, which I agree with Max and Sam's concerns here, these are the statements of basically an incoherent commander-in-chief. And so now you have commanders down the chain of command trying to figure out how to lawfully engage these targets. And the plan that the president has laid out in that press conference of simply claiming every power plant in the country, every bridge in the country is targetable, that just does not pass any relevant test that you would be looking at in order to properly engage those targets. He had another line in the conference about something, I think the entire country could be taken out in a single night. A lot of scholars in this area have been a little bit hesitant to just outright say that taking out a bridge is a war crime, taking out a power plant is a war crime, because as I just explained, that isn't always the case. There could be circumstances where they can be legally targetable. When you make statements like, we're going to take out the entire country in a single night, that's a per se war crime. And if that is the commander-in-chief ordering his commanders underneath him in the chain of command to do that, they should understand that that is a blatantly unlawful order. And a lot of what he has said today would constitute a blatantly unlawful order that they would be obliged not to follow. So you're right, they can be targetable in the circumstances that the president has laid out. I haven't identified a single reason why you would.
So, Max, if you are one of the service members who may be called to being engaged in some of this tomorrow night, what should you do? You know, I understand that the president can pardon people. Certainly, people have already floated the possibility Hegseth may need one by the time this is all said and done.
Sure.
But if you are down the chain of command and the president doesn't know who you are, but you are across this, what risk are you facing being engaged?
Look, this should not fall on the low-level service members who are directly on the front lines. They have to worry about not only their own lives, but the lives of those they have been entrusted with protecting and leading. But this should certainly fall on, one, the highest level generals who are just standing by and letting this pass. Think about the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, whose constitutional job is obligation, right? The job that he swore an oath to do is to provide unvarnished military guidance about risks. Where was his voice when it came time to the commander-in-chief establishing regime change as an objective and basically, for all intents and purposes, saying we're going to win the Super Bowl but not bring a quarterback onto the field, not matching strategic goals with operational resources? Where was he? Where was the Republican members of Congress, particularly the Republican veterans, who have just stood by and been fully owned subsidiaries of Donald Trump and MAGA Inc., and not kept in mind the oath that they swore to the Constitution as elected officials and previously as service members themselves? Where are they? They all ran for office saying they'd put the country first. Those are the folks that I'm thinking about. We should all stand behind the people on the front lines, and they shouldn't think that they're going to court over this.
Well, let me take your question and pose it back to Sam. Sam, where are the Republicans in Congress on all of this? Are they just happy to be out on recess?
Yes, very happy to be out on recess. I mean, look, there is a faction of the Republican, not a faction, a huge swath of the Republican Party, self-identified MAGA people, who will do whatever Trump says and who will get along with him no matter what, who will never raise their hand in an objection. And then there are the stray members who will say something. I think Senator Curtis of Utah, for instance, was over the weekend talked about not having a blank check or something like that. But that doesn't mean that everyone is on board. And so you posted the Marjorie Taylor Greene tweet this from yesterday, which I thought was very indicative of where that certain faction is. And you had people like Ann Coulter, obviously a longtime conservative, who was talking about Trump in terms that you would have been unfathomable to see her talking about a Republican president. Even Candace Owens, as crazy as her conspiracies are, was posting about her discomfort with Donald Trump in this moment. So there is discomfort. But it's not going to be reflected by the elected Republican establishment. Only one member of the administration has stood up and said, I'm not doing this, and that's Joe Kent. I don't know if that changes should something happen, as Trump has outlined on Tuesday night. But I think one lesson we know, one enduring lesson we know from all this time that Trump's been in our political life, is that there is unbelievable loyalty to him from people who are in elected office in the Republican Party. Unbelievable loyalty.
Margaret, I want to ask you a sort of 30,000-foot view, bigger picture question here. What happens to us if on the world stage we get the reputation, the kind of reputation that China and Russia have, that we just violate norms, we cannot be trusted? What happens to us?
It's a pretty terrifying thought, because if we are going to engage in basically indiscriminate killing tomorrow of Iranian civilians or structures that are going to wreak havoc on the civilian population there for an indefinite period, right? There's no plan to rebuild any of this. You're just talking about blasting them back to the so-called Stone Ages indefinitely. That is a real sea change. That is a game changer of how the United States conducts warfare. And it would be basically ripping up international agreements, which, by the way, we are bound by: the Geneva Conventions, NATO, the UN Charter. Those have been signed and ratified by Congress. OK, so they are not optional. They are basically tantamount to domestic law, and the Constitution under the Supremacy Clause treats them the same way. So I think that it would be just a complete game change in how the United States is viewed. And you know, apart from sort of the intrinsic horror that will happen on innocent civilians based on what the president is threatening here, we also stand to lose extremely valuable international alliances, because no country is going to trust us, even for agreements that have been signed and ratified by our own domestic legal apparatus, nor would they ever want to be fighting alongside us if we also cannot commit to following the law of armed conflict. So I think it would be internationally sort of catastrophic to the United States standing.